Well, no parent ever looks at their little kid and thinks that he's going to be a mass murderer someday, or a murderer, period. As a parent, you have all these hopes and dreams for your kids, and then they just let you down. This is a photo of me and Timmy, back when it was just me and Tim against the world. And we were kicking its ass. I look forward every day to coming home to him. I couldn't wait to get home to him. I just want to make sure that he grew up happy and knew that, he was very loved. Made a promise to myself and to him that I would do everything in my power to give him a better upbringing than I had. I was just the average Joe. I wanted him to be special. Somewhere I went wrong.
Use my hands to suffocate my kids.
Who did you use the belt on?
Babies.
Did any of the other children say anything before you killed them?
Gabriel said, I love you.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if there is a God and they do forgive him, send me to hell. And I tell you now, send me straight to hell. Because I don't want to be there with him. I knew damn well in my heart something wasn't right. I never did nothing. Now, because of that, 5 children lay dead. I can understand why people look at me the way they do. I raised a monster. This is where we used to go to church. We'd bring my grandchildren, and they loved it here. Well, ever since my grandchildren were killed, I just can't find myself to come back because of what my son did. And I struggled to do that, but I came. Everybody's been wonderful here, so there ain't nothing to do with no folks here whatsoever. It's me. I know it's me, and at this point, it's like, I know they're staring at me, and they're not. Well, as a parent of a child that's killed his own children, I find it most difficult to deal with because I question my faith. I question everything now. I never questioned it before.
You okay?
I was overwhelmed because now I knew not only did, I have my son, but now I got to provide him the life that we were trying to do before, but just by myself. I was like, it's going to be tough. I didn't want him to feel like he was abandoned from me. But more than anything, just to be happy. And I was going to do my ever-loving best to give him everything he needed. I got on a 3rd shift job to where I would go to work at 10:30, so I would be with Timmy every night to put him to bed. And then I would go to work, and I'd get home at 6. Then, of course, I'd wake him up, make him breakfast. I would be able to spend the whole day with Timmy when he'd get home from school. So I was with him the whole time, and he didn't know I was gone or, nothing. And so it worked out real well. When me and Timmy, it was just us, I thought it would make a stronger bond. I did. At that point, I thought everything was perfect. One year at Christmas, I got Timmy a BB gun, and, we'd go out and shoot it in the yard and, had little targets and stuff, and, it was all fun. We went through all the safety, things that you don't aim it at no one, you don't ever shoot at no one. I don't even want you shooting at animals. One day, I came home from work and walked into the apartment, and I seen Timmy, and he looks at me and says, "It shot the neighbor in the leg with the BB gun." This guy was like 73 years old or something like that. And, he shot him right in the back of the leg, and that was real nasty. And when I confronted him about it, I was just like, "You obviously knew what you were doing." And he said, "Do you want to see what it would do if he shot somebody?" I was irate, because we had discussed it, but he didn't accept punishment very well. Get mad at me and yell at me. Well, at the time, I thought Timmy was acting out, because he was a young kid and he'd already lost his mother. I believe Timmy always had mother issues. There's no doubt. This is my two boys, my three boys, with me in front of the Christmas tree. But you could look at Timmy and see that he really wasn't a happy kid at that time. Not happy about sharing me, is the way I always took it. Or being a part of a family. He's very jealous. He despised my wife. He always was just causing trouble for us. Tim told me that she was treating him badly, that she would make him stay in his room, wouldn't let him come out. And, he'd say he was hungry, she wouldn't give him nothing to eat, lying to me. He's just trying to get me to get rid of her. So it's just me and him again. I always try to reassure him that, I'm always going to be there for him. You need a mother figure as well, and he just didn't want to do it. Timmy was always jealous of his siblings, always. He never wanted nothing to do with them unless I was there. But I would even notice once in a while that he'd get a little rougher with them than he should. And sometimes he would take it a little further than it needed to be. And I always felt that he was sort of doing that on purpose to maybe get even with me or with my wife. Everything he seemed to do at that point was to stick a knife in the middle of it, I always wanted to poke into it. He wanted all the attention. I felt that I was caught between my son and my wife, and I just didn't know which way to turn. So I was caught in the middle of a real situation, really. There was an incident once with a dog, a family dog we had. The sweetest dog. You couldn't even get this dog to growl at you. She was just so sweet. Well, Timmy's room was in the basement at the time, and the dog was downstairs with Tim. And then I see the dog, all of a sudden it has like a red bloody eye, like somebody had poked it in the eye or something. And I questioned Timmy, "Did you do something to the dog?" He's like, "I didn't do nothing to your dog." He seemed pissed off. And I know the other kids didn't do it because, like I said, it had been downstairs and it came up and I had noticed it right away. And so I knew he was lying. And to me, it's just unbelievable because this dog was just so kind and sweet. And to hit this dog, or poke its eye or whatever had happened, to me was just really cruel. And it scared the hell out of me. That scared the hell out of me. What else does he hurt? Is he hurt any other animals? Are you introduced to your brothers? I'm just like, because he was jealous of his brothers. And so now, looking back then, is like, it's one of those signs of, not good, that you're abusing animals. Why didn't I raise him right not to do something so evil? I just know he was a good kid, man. How the hell did that happen? How did this happen? I don't know. As a parent, I think, it's my job to make sure that these kids, grow up to be good adults, good people. I thought I was doing a good job at that point. We used to love fishing. Timmy loved fishing. His kids loved fishing. I love fishing. We'd go out there and, spend hours and catch a little fish, and kids' eyes light up like it was the 4th of July, They think it's the biggest thing in the world. He was a sweet little boy. I didn't think there was ever nothing wrong with my child, but I could imagine if I did, I still would have thought he'd be okay. And like I said, it all fell apart. Didn't think it was going to happen, but, it happened. It's not nothing that I really discuss with anyone. How do you tell somebody, that your kid has killed 5 of your grandchildren? And I still struggle with it, and I always will. They begged me for a computer, but I really couldn't afford it at the time. But eventually I saved enough money to buy Timmy a computer for Christmas. He's just so happy, He just decided that, he just didn't give a damn no more. I wasn't happy about it. I was just really concerned about it, and that's why I said to you, what's your backup plan? And he's like, I ain't got no backup plan. Timmy didn't care what I said. He just really didn't care. He was gonna go his way, and that was all there was to it. He seemed pissed off. Not just at me, but at the world. The next few weeks, he's just becoming unbearable to live with. Cussing at everybody and just being mean to everybody, being mean to his brothers, my wife. I tried talking to him, but he really didn't want to talk about it. He just sort of shunned me. At that point, that's when me and my other boy's mother, we separated. So it destroyed that too. That was the final, break. A lot of the things that Timmy did contributed to the end of the relationship. And I was like, look, what the hell's wrong with you, son? There's nothing wrong with me. What the hell is wrong with you? And this and that. And he bumps up on my chest, and I push him back. And he's like, you know what? You can just kiss my ass. I'm out here. He decides he's going to go on his own, and I'm just feeling like, because damn, maybe I should have handled it a little differently or something, but that's all there is to it. It makes me feel like a failure beyond failure. That I didn't raise the kid, good enough. I don't know why I didn't blame Timmy, but I blame myself. What did I do wrong? And so it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I hear something in the kitchen, like somebody's breaking in or something. And I go running in there, and this person goes running out the door. Well, now at this point I realize it's Timmy. And so I'm running out screaming, Timmy, come back. You don't have to leave. Come back, come back. What's wrong? Is everything okay, And then I find out he was there to get something to eat, and because he's living in the streets. Dad just killed me. Now at this point, I'm worried like hell, And so I think, well, what the hell am I gonna do? And again, as a parent, I felt like I'd let him down so bad. And, a couple days go by and I don't see or hear from him. And then I find out, I get a call from the police that they've arrested him. And when I talked to them, they were like, well, unless I paid it, I would go to jail or him. I was devastated. I couldn't believe he had done that to me. I mean, it was demoralizing. Not just to me, but to my whole family, because, now everybody knows that all of a sudden this kid that I bragged on for all these years, and now I'm having to put him in jail. All those years of giving up my life, basically, to make sure his life was right, he just threw it away. Well, I blame myself a lot, and I can't seem to get over it. That's when I started thinking back. The thing that kept coming into me is that he was always jealous of the children, but he was changing, and it changed for the worse, not the better. I mean, he was a good, good, clean kid.
A heartbreaking development for you now. 5 missing children from South Carolina have been found dead in rural Alabama. The suspected killer is their father, 32-year-old Timothy Jones.
I can't believe it's been 10 years. Thank God for my wife, Julie. I mean, she at least tries to understand me. Julie is a wonderful person. She's got a heart of gold. I'm not the person I used to be, by no means. I can't sleep. I don't like to be around people so much. I stay in my house more than I ever did before. I feel like people look at me as the father of a murderer and not who I am. Yeah. I would probably look at me the same way. Well, when Tim got out of prison, the biggest change was the religion. He came out with a whole new outlook on life, that he was going to live by the Bible. He was like, it'll be okay, Dad. Trust me, just watch. I'm going to show you. I paid my price, and I'm going to go forward now with my life, and God is showing me the way. I mean, he was just so happy, and I was happy for him. I thought for sure that, this should send him on the right track again. The first time I held Mary Gracie it was like holding Timmy all over again. I mean, it was a great feeling. And the way that baby smiled at me, I mean, all I could do was just hold her and cry. I mean, she was just a little angel. And, looking at my son and realizing that, he's a man now, I was just proud of him. And thought, my God, that boy's come a long way. It was a good day. And I'll never forget it. One of the happiest days of my life, other than my children being born. Well, we're at my house one weekend and, seemed to be having a good time. Jim got a good job with a big tech company. They made good money, so everything seemed good. Amber and Julie are in the back, with the children. And I would try to talk to him about what was going on with him. about his life, and he didn't really want to talk to me about anything. But the religion thing, he wanted to always talk about. We clashed a little bit over it because he says, Amber, she can not wear nothing but skirts and this and that. And I was like, man, dude, this is the 20th century. What the hell is wrong with you? I mean, my God, son. And of course, that would upset him. And then he would get mad at me. One thing led to another, and he looks at me and tells me, I had to just beat your ass. And I looked right back at him and said, okay, now look, son, I love you, but you're my child. As long as I live, I'll never let you hit me. And then he looked at me and told me, I could just kill you right now. The stare he gave me was something I'd never seen before. It was an evil look. To think that my son would say that to me just devastated me. I was mad, but I was hurt. And I was hurt more than I was mad. So I tried to be calm in the beginning, like, okay, look, come on, just be cool, man. But it actually scared me a little bit. And he looked at me real hard and snatched my necklace off my neck and threw it to the ground. Tim goes and gets Amber and the kids and left. And that day is when I seen the side of Timmy that I never knew was there. That was when I had actually seen the evil come out of Tim. I mean, I truly felt like he was unpredictable. I mean, I really, like I said, it scared me. I knew he was having a little trouble with his marriage. After I saw how angry he got with me, it scared me. I was questioning to make sure that, that Timmy was not hurting no one or abusing no one. I'm having Julie looking at the kids and making sure they're good, that they ain't got no bruises or nothing like that. And there was nothing unusual. I mean, after all this came to head, what happened, everything just hit me. It was like, holy shit, why didn't I do something? Because I knew. In my heart, I knew. And I didn't do nothing. And I'll never forgive myself for that. I mean, I knew. When Tim shows up for holidays, literally the minute he shows up, he's got an attitude. And I could see it. He was looking to pick on someone that night. I don't know what it was, but man, it just seemed to go south quick. And I mean quick. And man, he flips. He jumps up, he says, you know what? I know you always loved him more than me, and you kissed my ass. I'm out of here. I'm like, what's going on? What? The thing that kept coming into me is that he was always jealous of the children. I ain't staying here no more, you son of a bitch, and, grabs the kids. I mean, they were all crying. I want to try to show these kids the best Christmas I can. Because they're just kids. And then we do all this, and then to Tim to do that, man, it was just devastating. This is what Timmy's thing was. When he'd get mad, he would use these kids against me. Just realized that he's not the person that I knew. This was someone else. Coward. A piece of coward that would use a kid as a pawn in your scheme of life. That's just low. Why would you hurt the people that care for these babies? That you know beyond a shadow of a doubt to give their life for them. You didn't give looking at my 3 grandbabies. Natan, Eli, and Mary Gracie. This is an Easter photo. You can look at Natan and see that, man, he was like a split image of Timmy. And Mary, God, I love her so much. Right now, she'd be a young lady. And Mary, I used to tell her all the time that she was going to be a ballerina. Because she'd walk around on her tiptoes for hours. It's like, baby, don't that hurt your feet? Nope. I'm going to be a ballerina. And Eli, he was such an emotional little boy. He was just always so worried that he had to make everybody happy. Oh, my God. These 3 little kids were so sweet, so innocent. One weekend, my parents had met Tim and the kids in Atlanta, and my dad comes back to me and says, "You need to fix what's going on with Timmy. Something's wrong." So I say, "What?" She says, "Well, the kids seem really hungry. He shaved all their heads. And, son, I slept with my eyes open. He scared me." So literally that evening, I call. Because, again, he's not going to ever do nothing with me again until I call and apologize. And I swore to God I was never going to do it, you know. And after my dad told me this, I call up and I say, "Tim, it's your dad, you know." And he wasn't rude or crude. And he's like, "How you doing?" I was like, "Good, I'm calling to apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for whatever happened or whatever I've done to upset you. I apologize for it. You know, so please let's bury this and let's go forward, okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, great, you know." And it's coming up on Labor Day weekend, and I said, "Maybe you can come and see us." He's like, "I'd like that. That would be nice." I told Julie, and she just happy. I mean, of course, everybody knows what happened after that. Well, the next couple days, we don't hear from Timmy at all. Now, of course, the worry, alarms go off, like, holy, what has he done? And then I told Julie, he killed him. I'm telling you right now, man, I know it. I mean, I know it. I just feel it with every part of my body. The police had called me and told me that Timmy had been picked up at a roadblock. And of course, the first thing I asked is, where are the children? And there's no children with him. And I just started, I was working in my bathroom, and I just started beating the hell out of the tile in the room in the bathroom. Because I knew what he did. I mean, God almighty, the poor kids, man. Oh, God. It's just so evil, I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, you gotta be evil to do something like that. You can't. And it just destroyed me. And it still destroys me.
All right, can you walk us through what happened?
I questioned the town about 4 outlets that he blew. I tried to use more harsh measures to just try to get out of him what was going on. I just PT'd his ass till he couldn't handle it. Squats and push-ups.
How long were you having him PT?
PT like an hour. I come back and find out that he's deceased. And when I find out he's deceased, then just the fan and all.
How did hit the fan, Tim?
And I followed suit with the other 4.
How did you
Said
kill
that
him,
was
Tim?
with my hands. I used my hands to suffocate my kids.
Did any of the other children say anything before you killed them?
Gabriel said, I love you. God, I'm sorry.
You know, if you believe in God so God much, why'd you kill your kids? I don't believe a damn word he's saying, because you're gonna tell me you're crying because you killed your 5 kids. You didn't cry when you killed the first one? How about the second one? At what point do you not say that, oh my God, what have I done? You just continue to go on? And these children are crying and telling you, Daddy, I love you, please don't do this? I mean, that just rips my heart out my chest. You know, and it's times like this where if I heard something like this and had Timmy in front of me, I would kill him. You don't get forgiven for killing 5 babies by strangling your own children and watching them, looking in their little eyes. Well, I'll tell you right now, if there is a God and they do forgive him, send me to hell. And I tell you now, send me straight to hell. Because I don't want to be there with him. I remember this photo. Just wondering how time went so fast. I mean, he couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. He could do no wrong, you know? I mean, he was just a sweet, innocent little boy. Loved me crazy, and this is about the same time when he would reach into my pocket to see what I'd bought him. Matter of fact, that's probably what he's eating. But he was just so innocent. Can't believe he went from this to what he is now. The police told me I needed to come to the police station. And they're like, you know, you won't tell us where the children are. And so he's like, you can go in there and try and see if he'll tell you. They take me upstairs where they got him in this room, and, you know, when he sees me, he's just looking wild as hell. I've never seen this boy, you know, ever. I mean, I wanted so bad to reach over and just punch him out, you know, and scream and yell and go crazy on him, but I knew at the same time that wasn't gonna get the kids. So I just started asking him, you know, just like, easy, son, just, you know, where are the children at, son? And he looks at me, and out of the clear blue, he's like, you know, I could kill you right now. He grabs me by the throat and says I could kill you. And I said, go ahead. You can't kill me, son. You know, I love you. And he just, you know, started crying real hard and let go. It's like I seen Timmy the little baby when he was little. Just scared. Inside, I'm being torn apart. telling me, look, I still love you, son, but please tell us where the kids are so we can go and get them and, and get them home, please. And he looks at me and he's like, I'll tell you, Dad. I'll take you there. He had to go to prison for killing one of his children. He wasn't going to leave the rest of them for anyone else. He is so greedy that he would rather kill him than see him with me. And that's how I've always looked at this. And I don't think I'll ever look at it any differently. Well, I do feel ashamed because, it's my son. And, and I'm the one who raised him, so, you always feel like a part of it's my fault. I've felt that way since day one. I just never thought I'd release a beast like that on society. I really haven't talked to my son, or, I don't write. I just don't. My son will be executed. It's just a matter of when. So I figure about 4 or 5 more years, and I have to start this all over again now by burying my son. And that's why I try to tell people, you don't understand, this kid wasn't this way. He just lost it. I can't tell you why. I wish I could. I would. But now I'm going to have to go through the process of killing him. Nothing I can do. So let's deal with that day when it gets here. Then at that point, maybe I can move forward. But I don't think until he's gone, I don't think I'll be able to. Because of me, and me alone, those kids are dead, because I could have stopped it. Might have had to kill them, but, I knew it. And to know that your child took their lives like he did, it's just so unsettling and so unforgiving and just so atrocious. That I raised a monster. That's the bottom line. All the work I did, all the time and effort I put in, worked my fingers to the bone for him. This is going to be my legacy, that I'm a murder-raising piece of and I have to accept that. I don't think I'll ever be able to get over it. I just don't. I just learned to accept it, live with it, and, go day by day. Because it's hard to live with. That's just it.
Parenthood is painful. There are no promises. Your children may not turn out the way you want them to. Nobody prepares you for when it's the 2 people you love most in the world and one kills the other. What do you do then?
Part 1. The Hook. On the morning of April 24th, 2006, the city of Medicine had woke beneath a pale Alberta sky. The streets were quiet. The weekend was ending. Lawns still carried traces of the night's cold air, and the neighborhood looked exactly the way it had looked hundreds of times before. Nothing about that morning suggested that one of the most disturbing family murder cases in Canadian history was waiting behind the door of an ordinary suburban home. From the outside, the Richardson house looked peaceful. The curtains were drawn. The driveway sat empty. The neighborhood remained wrapped in the calm rhythm of a typical Sunday morning. Children had played on these streets. Families had walked their dogs along these sidewalks. Neighbors had waved to one another from front porches and garden paths. It was the kind of place where people felt safe. The kind of place where parents believed they knew what dangers looked like. The kind of place where unimaginable things were supposed to happen somewhere else. But behind the walls of that house, 3 lives had already ended. Mark Richardson, Deborah Richardson, and 8-year-old Jacob Richardson. A father, a mother, a little boy, an entire family destroyed in a single night. And at the center of the mystery stood one person who seemed, at first glance, impossible to suspect. A 12-year-old girl. 12 years old. An age usually associated with school projects, birthday parties, and childhood dreams. An age when most children are still figuring out who they want to become. An age when parents worry about grades, friendships, and the awkward transition into adolescence. Not murder. Not conspiracy. Not a plan that would leave an entire family dead. Yet within hours of the bodies being discovered, investigators would find themselves staring into a case that challenged every assumption they had about violence, manipulation, and the darkness that can hide behind an innocent face. Because this was not the story of a masked intruder breaking into a home. It was not the story of a serial killer stalking random victims. It was not even the story of a family targeted by enemies. This was something far more unsettling. This was a story about trust, about obsession, about influence, and about a child caught inside a relationship that many would later struggle to understand. As police vehicles began arriving at the Richardson residence that morning, yellow tape soon stretched across the property. Officers moved carefully through rooms that still carried the traces of ordinary family life. Family photographs. Furniture arranged exactly as it had been the day before. Everyday objects frozen in place. And scattered among those familiar details were signs of unimaginable violence. Investigators knew immediately that this was not a natural death. This was not an accident. Someone had entered this home. Someone had wielded a knife. Someone had stayed long enough to leave devastation behind. But there was another detail that immediately caught their attention. One member of the family was missing. 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson. She was nowhere to be found. And suddenly the investigation took on an entirely different shape. Perhaps she had escaped. Perhaps she had witnessed the attack. Perhaps she had been kidnapped. Perhaps she was injured somewhere. Perhaps she was terrified and hiding. At that moment, police had no way of knowing. What they did know was that a child appeared to have vanished from a house where 3 family members had been murdered. And that possibility generated immediate urgency. The search began. Photographs circulated. Investigators worked around the clock. The public watched anxiously. Many people feared the worst. Others hoped desperately that Jasmine had survived and would soon be found. Few could have imagined where the investigation was actually heading. Because while police searched for answers, a much darker picture was beginning to emerge. A picture built from internet messages, secret conversations, forbidden relationships, hidden fantasies, and plans that, at first glance, seemed too horrifying to be real. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the story became. What they uncovered would shock not only Medicine Hat, but all of Canada. The details sounded less like reality and more like the plot of a nightmare. A young girl, an older boyfriend, talk of eternal love, talk of running away together, talk of removing obstacles, and eventually, according to prosecutors, talk of murder. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side stood a loving family trying to guide their daughter through adolescence. On the other stood a relationship that appeared to be pulling her further and further away from them. Somewhere between those two worlds, something had gone terribly wrong. The tragedy would soon become the subject of national headlines. Television crews descended on Medicine Hat. Newspapers carried updates across the country. Experts debated the psychological dimensions of a case. Parents looked at their own children differently. Investigators revisited every detail repeatedly, searching for explanations. But even after years of analysis, One question continued to haunt everyone who encountered the story. How does a child become connected to something this horrific? Not a hardened criminal. Not an adult with decades of violent history. A 12-year-old girl. A 7th grader. A child. That question sat at the center of the case from the very beginning. It hovered over every courtroom proceeding, every newspaper article, every television interview, every conversation among neighbors trying to make sense of what had happened. Because when society encounters evil, people naturally look for familiar patterns. They search for warning signs that fit their understanding of the world. But this case refused to fit neatly into any category. The facts seemed to collide with common assumptions about childhood. And that made the story even more disturbing. As daylight spread across Medicine Hat on that April morning, investigators could not yet see the full picture. Pieces of the puzzle remained scattered. Some clues sat hidden inside computers. Some existed in memories and conversations. Some waited hundreds of kilometers away. But the truth was already there, waiting. Piece by piece, the investigation would uncover it. And when it did, Canada would find itself confronting one of the most shocking family murder cases in its history. A case involving obsession, manipulation, teenage fantasy, and devastating violence. A case that began in a quiet suburban home. A case that ended with 3 graves. And a case that would force an entire nation to ask whether innocence can sometimes conceal something far darker than anyone wants to believe. This is the story of the Richardson family murders. Part 2. The setting. Long before police tape surrounded the Richardson home, before news helicopters hovered above Medicine Hat, and before the entire country learned the names connected to one of Canada's most shocking family murder cases, life inside the Richardson household appeared remarkably ordinary. Medicine Hat sat quietly in the southeastern corner of Alberta, a city surrounded by vast prairie landscapes that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The skies felt larger there than in most places. Sunrises painted broad bands of gold across open fields, and evenings often settled gently over neighborhoods where families knew one another by name. It was not the kind of city people associated with notorious crimes. The community carried a reputation for safety and stability. Children rode bicycles along residential streets. Neighbors chatted across driveways. Parents attended school events and local sports games. Life moved at a comfortable pace. For many families, Medicine Hat represented exactly the kind of place where children could grow up protected from the harsher realities of the world. The Richardson family fit naturally into that environment. Mark Richardson was 42 years old. Friends and neighbors often described him as hardworking and devoted to his family. He carried the responsibilities of fatherhood seriously and believed strongly in providing structure for his children. Those who knew him remembered a man who invested time and energy into creating a stable home. His wife, Deborah Richardson, was 48. She was known as a caring mother who took pride in her family. Like countless parents, she balanced daily responsibilities with the constant effort of guiding her children through the challenges of growing up. Those who interacted with her frequently described warmth beneath her firm expectations. Together, Mark and Deborah had built a life that looked successful from the outside. Their home stood in a quiet neighborhood. Their children attended school. Their routines followed familiar patterns. There was little reason for anyone to imagine that violence would someday enter their lives. The youngest child, Jacob Richardson, was only 8 years old. At that age, the world is still full of simple wonders. School days feel long. Weekends seem endless. The future exists as a distant concept that hardly matters. Children like Jacob often live entirely in the present moment. A game, a favorite movie, an afternoon with friends. Small joys that adults sometimes forget how to appreciate. Photographs taken before the tragedy show a boy with the kind of smile that appears effortless. Looking at those images years later would become especially painful because they captured a future that would never arrive. Then there was Jasmine Richardson, 12 years old, standing on the threshold between childhood and adolescence. An age marked by uncertainty. An age when emotions often feel larger than life. an age when identity begins to take shape. For parents, these years can be challenging. Children start seeking independence. They experiment with different interests. They become increasingly influenced by peers and outside ideas. Sometimes conflicts emerge between family expectations and a young person's desire for freedom. Most families navigate those tensions without catastrophe. Arguments happen. Rules are challenged. Boundaries are tested. Eventually, everyone moves forward. But in the Richardson household, those ordinary adolescent struggles would gradually evolve into something far more dangerous. To understand how that happened, it is necessary to look beyond the image of the family that neighbors saw. Because beneath the surface, Jasmine was beginning to change. Like many young teenagers, she became interested in alternative styles and subcultures. She explored new music, new forms of self-expression, and new social circles. None of that was unusual by itself. Across North America during the early 2000s, many teenagers were drawn toward Gothic aesthetics. Dark clothing, dramatic makeup, themes involving fantasy, vampires, and rebellion. For most young people, these interests were simply part of exploring identity. Parents often worried. Teenagers often insisted they were misunderstood. Eventually, the phase passed. But in Jasmine's case, one particular relationship would transform what might otherwise have remained a temporary fascination. That relationship involved a 23-year-old man named Jeremy Steinke. The age difference alone raised immediate concerns. Jasmine was 12. Jeremy was 23. The gap was not merely numerical. It represented a vast difference in maturity, experience, and influence. Yet despite that reality, a relationship developed between them. Steinke cultivated a highly theatrical image. He often dressed in black. He embraced a Gothic appearance. He presented himself as someone who existed outside conventional society. Friends and acquaintances later described his fascination with dark themes, violence, and fantasies that blurred the line between performance and reality. To a young teenager searching for identity, that image could appear exciting, mysterious, rebellious, different from the ordinary world of parents, teachers, and school rules. For Jasmine, Jeremy became more than a boyfriend. He became an escape, an alternative reality, a doorway into a world that felt larger and more dramatic than everyday life. As their relationship deepened, the conflict within the Richardson household intensified. Mark and Deborah strongly opposed the relationship. From their perspective, the reasons were obvious. Their daughter was 12 years old. Jeremy was 23. No responsible parent could ignore such a situation. They attempted to restrict contact. They enforced rules. They tried to separate Jasmine from him. To many parents, those actions would seem entirely reasonable. But to a young girl immersed in powerful emotions, those restrictions felt very different. Every prohibition reinforced the idea that her relationship was under attack. Every rule became evidence that her parents stood in the way of what she wanted. Every argument widened the emotional distance between her and her family. This dynamic is tragically common in certain manipulative relationships. The more outside voices express concern, the more isolated the vulnerable person becomes. Gradually, the relationship itself begins to feel like the only source of understanding, the only source of acceptance, the only source of love. Whether Jasmine fully understood those psychological forces at the time remains a matter of debate. What is clear is that she became increasingly emotionally invested. As months passed, her attachment grew stronger. The ordinary rhythms of family life continued around her. Meals were shared. School days came and went. Household routines remained intact. Yet beneath those routines, emotional fault lines were widening. And nobody outside the family could fully see them. Neighbors still saw a normal household. Teachers saw a student. Friends saw a young girl navigating adolescence. The future tragedy remained invisible. That is one of the most unsettling aspects of many true crime cases. Disaster rarely announces itself. There are no warning sirens. No dramatic signals visible to everyone. Often the most devastating events develop quietly behind closed doors. Small decisions accumulate. Resentments grow. Influences deepen. Secrets multiply. And by the time the danger becomes visible, it is already too late. Inside the Richardson home, those invisible pressures were steadily building. What began as a forbidden relationship was slowly evolving into obsession. What began as teenage rebellion was moving towards something darker. And while Mark and Deborah believed they were protecting their daughter, forces were already taking shape that would eventually destroy everything they had spent years building. The peaceful streets of Medicine Hat remained unaware. The neighborhood continued its daily routines. Children still played outside. Parents still planned for the future. The Richardson family still appeared ordinary. But beneath that ordinary surface, a tragedy was already beginning to unfold. Not with violence. Not yet. It began with emotions, with influence, with fantasy, and with a 12-year-old girl who was drifting further away from the people who loved her most, moving slowly toward a path that would end in one of the most horrifying family murders Canada had ever seen. Part 3. The Victim Story. Before the headlines, before the police reports, before courtroom testimony and national media coverage, there was simply a family living an ordinary life in Medicine Hat. The tragedy that would later shock Canada often overshadows an important truth. The people at the center of this story were not characters in a crime narrative. They were human beings with routines, dreams, frustrations, plans, and countless small moments that never made it into the newspapers. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, it is necessary to step back from the crime itself and spend time with the people whose lives ended long before anyone understood what was coming. Mark Richardson woke up every day carrying the responsibilities familiar to many fathers. Bills needed to be paid. Work had to be done. A household needed stability. Children needed guidance. The role rarely brought headlines or recognition. Like countless parents, much of his effort took place quietly in the background. The best parenting often goes unnoticed because its purpose is to create normalcy. Friends described him as protective, dependable, a man who cared deeply about his family. Photographs taken before the murders show an ordinary father. There is nothing in those images suggesting that his life would one day become the subject of national news. He appears exactly as many fathers do, comfortable in family photographs, focused on the people around him rather than on himself. He believed in rules. He believed in responsibility. And like many parents raising a daughter entering adolescence, he sometimes found himself in conflict with Jasmine. Arguments happened. Disagreements happened. Limits were enforced. From the perspective of a parent, these conflicts are often expressions of love. They are attempts to protect children from dangers they may not yet understand. From the perspective of a young teenager, however, those same boundaries can feel like walls. The gap between those two perspectives would become one of the most tragic elements of this story. Deborah Richardson approached motherhood with the same mixture of care and concern that defines countless families. She worried. She planned. She guided. She tried to keep her children moving toward a healthy future. People who knew her often remembered warmth in her personality. Yet warmth does not mean weakness. Parents frequently find themselves forced into difficult decisions when they believe their children are making dangerous choices. Deborah faced exactly that challenge. The relationship between Jasmine and Jeremy Steinke alarmed her. The age difference alone was enough to trigger concern. 12 years old. 23 years old. To Deborah, the situation represented a threat. To Jasmine, it represented love. The collision between those two beliefs would gradually reshape the atmosphere inside the household. Still, daily life continued. Breakfasts were prepared. Laundry was folded. School schedules were managed. Life rarely feels dramatic while it is being lived. Most families experience tension without imagining catastrophe. Most arguments end. Most conflicts fade. Most children eventually understand why their parents made certain decisions. The Richardson family had every reason to believe they would eventually reach that point as well. Then there was Jacob, only 8 years old, the youngest member of the family, the smallest, the most innocent. In many ways, Jacob represents the most heartbreaking aspect of the case. He stood completely outside the conflicts unfolding around him. The arguments were not about him. The tensions were not about him. The forbidden relationship was not his responsibility. He was simply a child living his life. A little boy with school assignments, favorite activities, and childhood routines. The age of 8 exists in a special place between early childhood and growing independence. Children at that age still look toward their parents for security, still trust the world around them, still believe that home is the safest place imaginable. Jacob had no reason to think otherwise. His room contained the ordinary signs of childhood. Toys, books, personal treasures that would seem insignificant to adults, but meant everything to a young boy. Those details would later become painful reminders of a life interrupted before it had truly begun. Every parent imagines milestones for their children. Future birthdays, graduations, careers, families of their own. Mark and Deborah undoubtedly imagined those things for Jacob. None of those milestones would ever arrive. Then there was Jasmine, the person whose story is perhaps the most complicated. Long before she became known across Canada, she was simply a 12-year-old girl navigating one of the most confusing stages of life. Adolescence can feel like standing between two worlds. No longer a small child, not yet an adult. Emotions become stronger. Identity becomes more important. Acceptance becomes desperately valuable. Young people begin searching for answers to questions they often cannot fully articulate. Who am I? Where do I belong? Who understands me? For Jasmine, those questions became increasingly tied to Jeremy Steinke. People often struggle to understand how a 12-year-old could become so emotionally invested in someone more than a decade older. The answer is rarely simple. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable to attention, validation, and emotional influence. What may appear obviously inappropriate to adults can feel completely different to a young teenager experiencing intense emotions for the first time. Jeremy presented himself as someone unique, someone misunderstood, someone separate from ordinary society. To many adults, the image appeared immature and troubling. To a vulnerable young teenager, it could appear exciting, special, romantic. As Jasmine became more attached to him, the distance between her and her parents seemed to grow. The home that once represented safety increasingly felt like restriction. The rules that once seemed normal increasingly felt oppressive. The people trying hardest to protect her became the people she viewed as obstacles. This transformation did not happen overnight. It happened gradually. Conversation by conversation. Argument by argument. Choice by choice. And because it happened slowly, its danger remained difficult to recognize in real time. One of the most unsettling aspects of this case is that there were moments when everything could still have been different. There were family dinners, ordinary evenings, conversations, opportunities for reconciliation. The future had not yet been written. The tragedy was not inevitable. But as weeks turned into months, emotional divisions deepened. The relationship between Jasmine and her parents became increasingly strained. Meanwhile, her attachment to Jeremy continued to strengthen. Looking back, it is tempting to search for a single moment when everything changed. A single decision, a single argument, a single mistake. But real life rarely works that way. Most tragedies emerge from many small developments rather than one dramatic turning point. The Richardson family did not wake up one morning expecting disaster. They woke up expecting another ordinary day. That is what makes their story so heartbreaking. The people at the center of it were not living inside a crime story. They were living inside a family. A father trying to protect his daughter. A mother trying to guide her child. A little boy growing up in what he believed was a safe home. And a 12-year-old girl drifting further into a world of fantasy, obsession, and emotional dependence that would eventually lead to consequences beyond anything her family could have imagined. As spring approached Alberta in 2006, the Richardson household still stood quietly in its neighborhood. The lawn still needed mowing. The dishes still needed washing. School still started each morning. Life continued. From the outside, Nothing appeared extraordinary. But beneath that appearance, forces were moving that would soon destroy an entire family and leave a nation struggling to understand how such a tragedy could possibly happen. Part 4. The Incident. The night of April 23, 2006 began like countless other nights in Medicine Hat. The sun slipped below the Alberta horizon, painting the western sky in fading shades of orange and purple before darkness gradually settled across the city. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Porch lights illuminated quiet front yards. Families gathered inside their homes, finishing dinners, watching television, preparing for another work week. Nothing about that evening suggested that one family was approaching its final hours together. Inside the Richardson home, life appeared ordinary. The house stood peacefully among neighboring residences. Windows glowed softly against the darkness outside. The familiar comfort of home surrounded its occupants. Mark Richardson had no reason to believe he would never see another sunrise. Deborah Richardson had no reason to believe the routines she had followed for years were coming to an end. 8-year-old Jacob had no reason to fear the night ahead. Home was supposed to be the safest place in the world. For children especially, that belief forms one of the foundations of life. A locked door, a familiar bedroom, parents nearby, the certainty that tomorrow will arrive exactly as expected. Jacob went to sleep carrying that certainty. He could not know that plans had already been made beyond the walls of his room. Plans discussed in secret. Plans born from obsession and fantasy. Plans that would soon transform a quiet family home into a crime scene. In another part of the city, events were moving toward a point of no return. Months of emotional conflict had created an atmosphere in which fantasy increasingly blurred with reality. Messages exchanged between Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke had grown darker. What may once have seemed like rebellious teenage conversations had evolved into discussions investigators would later examine with horror. Words that might have been dismissed as immature fantasies were becoming something else. Something dangerous. Something real. One of the most chilling aspects of the case is that the murders did not emerge from a sudden explosion of anger. There was no spontaneous argument. No unexpected confrontation. According to investigators and prosecutors, what happened that night was the result of planning. The difference matters. Spontaneous violence can sometimes be explained by emotion overwhelming judgment in a single moment. Planning requires something different. Planning requires time, thought, decision-making, the opportunity to stop, the opportunity to reconsider, the opportunity to walk away. Yet, somehow the plan continued moving forward. As darkness settled over Medicine Hat, Jeremy Steinke approached the Richardson residence. The neighborhood remained quiet. Most residents were inside their homes. Televisions glowed behind curtains. Cars sat parked in driveways. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing warned neighbors that within hours police officers would be standing outside this very house. The details later presented in court painted a horrifying picture. Steinke entered the home armed with a knife. What happened next unfolded largely behind closed doors, known only through evidence recovered afterward and testimony presented during the investigation. Mark Richardson became the first victim. The attack was brutal, violent, personal. Unlike a shooting, where distance separates attacker and victim, a knife attack forces direct proximity. Every movement becomes intimate. Every act requires physical effort. The violence is impossible to ignore. Investigators later determined that Mark suffered numerous stab wounds. The assault left little doubt about the attacker's intent. This was not an accident, not a warning, not a confrontation that spiraled unexpectedly out of control. It was murder. Somewhere inside the house, Deborah Richardson also became a target. The woman who had spent years caring for her family now found herself facing unimaginable violence within her own home. The details revealed during legal proceedings showed that she too suffered multiple stab wounds. The attack left no chance for survival. By the time it ended, both parents were dead. The house that had once represented security had become a place of devastation. But the horror was not over. Upstairs, or perhaps still asleep, depending on the precise timeline reconstructed by investigators, was 8-year-old Jacob Richardson. This part of the story remains one of the most heartbreaking. Jacob was not involved in the conflicts that had consumed the household. He had no role in the forbidden relationship, no role in the arguments, no role in the tensions between his parents and his sister. He was simply a child, a little boy, yet that offered no protection. According to court findings, Jacob was also killed during the attack. The realization stunned Canadians when details became public. Many people could process, however imperfectly, violence directed at adults. But the death of an 8-year-old boy introduced a different level of horror. A child who posed no threat. A child who had his entire life ahead of him. A child whose future disappeared in a single night. As the violence ended, 3 members of the Richardson family lay dead inside their home. 3 lives extinguished. 3 futures erased. And yet 1 member of the family remained alive. Jasmine Richardson, the 12-year-old daughter. At first glance, her survival appeared to support a straightforward theory. Perhaps she had escaped. Perhaps she had been taken away. Perhaps she was another victim. But as investigators would later discover, nothing about this case was straightforward. While the murders themselves lasted only a relatively short period of time, their consequences would ripple outward for years. Across Canada, across courtrooms, across countless conversations among parents struggling to comprehend what had happened. The hours immediately following the murders passed in eerie silence. The neighborhood slept. Neighbors remained unaware. No emergency sirens pierced the night. No crowds gathered outside. The darkness concealed the tragedy. Inside the house, ordinary objects remained exactly where they had been before the violence. Family photographs still hung on walls. Furniture remained in place. Personal belongings sat untouched. The contrast between everyday life and extraordinary brutality would later strike investigators as deeply unsettling. Crime scenes often reveal this contradiction. Evidence of violence exists alongside evidence of normality. A cup left on a table. A school item resting on a desk. A family photograph smiling from a shelf. Tiny reminders that victims were living ordinary lives moments before everything changed. As dawn approached Medicine Hat, the city remained unaware that one of its most shocking criminal cases had already begun. The first rays of morning light touched rooftops. Birds appeared. Traffic slowly returned to the streets. People prepared for work and school. Life continued. But inside the Richardson home, time had effectively stopped several hours earlier. The tragedy waited quietly behind closed doors. Waiting to be discovered. Waiting for investigators. Waiting for a community to learn the truth. And waiting for a revelation even more disturbing than the murders themselves. Because when police eventually began piecing together the events of that night, they would uncover evidence suggesting that the greatest threat had not come from a stranger breaking into the family home. Instead, the investigation would point towards something almost impossible to comprehend. The destruction of the Richardson family had begun from within. And at the center of that revelation stood a 12-year-old girl whose role in the tragedy would soon shock an entire nation. Part 5. The Discovery. Morning arrived in Medicine Hat with the same quiet predictability it always had. The city stretched awake beneath a clear Alberta sky. People prepared for work. Coffee makers hummed in kitchens. Cars rolled out of driveways. Children got ready for school. The world moved forward, completely unaware that a family had already been erased during the night. On the street where the Richardson family lived, nothing immediately appeared unusual. The houses stood in neat rows. Front lawns waited for spring growth. The neighborhood carried the peaceful atmosphere that had long defined the area. Yet behind one front door, silence had replaced life. No footsteps. No conversations. No movement. Only the stillness left behind after unimaginable violence. The discovery would begin, as so many major investigations do, with something small. Something that felt out of place. Something ordinary enough to attract attention. The exact details would later be examined repeatedly, But what matters most is that eventually concern led someone toward the Richardson home. At first, there was no expectation of horror. No expectation of a triple homicide. People do not approach familiar houses expecting to encounter death. They expect routine explanations. A missed appointment. A misunderstanding. A forgotten obligation. Normal answers to normal questions. The truth waiting inside the Richardson residence belonged to an entirely different reality. When the home was entered, the illusion of normalcy shattered instantly. Mark Richardson was found first. The sight was overwhelming. There are moments in criminal investigations that immediately tell experienced responders they are facing something extraordinary. This was one of those moments. The scene revealed violence. Not confusion. Not accident. Violence. The kind of violence that transforms a home into a crime scene in seconds. Emergency services were contacted. Police responded. And almost immediately, the scale of the tragedy began to emerge. Officers moved carefully through the residence. Room by room. Step by step. Each discovery made the situation worse. Deborah Richardson was found dead. Then investigators located Jacob, 8 years old, the youngest victim. For many officers, crimes involving children create a particular emotional weight. Law enforcement personnel are trained to remain professional. They are trained to focus on evidence, to maintain composure, to think clearly. Yet certain scenes stay with investigators forever. The discovery of a murdered child often belongs in that category. The realization spread quickly among responding personnel. This was not a single homicide. This was not a domestic dispute ending in one death. This was an entire family destroyed. 3 victims. 3 crime scenes within the same home. 3 lives ended during a single night. As officers secured the residence, the atmosphere changed. Every person arriving at the scene understood they were entering an investigation that would attract significant attention. Major crimes create a certain energy, not excitement, urgency. Every detail matters. Every footprint, every fingerprint, every drop of blood, every object out of place. Because somewhere among those details exists the truth. And in the earliest hours of any investigation, that truth remains hidden. Crime scene specialists began documenting everything. Photographs, measurements, physical evidence. Investigators understood that every observation might later become crucial. Meanwhile, another realization was beginning to take shape. Something was missing. Or, more accurately, someone. The Richardson family consisted of 4 people. Only 3 had been found. Where was Jasmine? The question immediately changed the direction of the investigation. At 12 years old, Jasmine Richardson was legally and emotionally viewed first as a potential victim. Police did not initially know what had happened to her. Perhaps she had escaped. Perhaps she had hidden somewhere after witnessing the murders. Perhaps she had been abducted by the killer. Perhaps she was injured and unable to seek help. Every possibility remained open. And because of that uncertainty, concern for her safety became urgent. Investigators began gathering information immediately. Descriptions were distributed. Search efforts accelerated. Time mattered. If Jasmine had been kidnapped, every minute could make a difference. The possibility of a surviving child transformed the case into both a homicide investigation and a missing person search. As news spread through local law enforcement channels, resources expanded. Detectives arrived. Supervisors arrived. Specialized investigators arrived. The house quickly became the center of a rapidly growing operation. Outside, neighbors watched from a distance. Many could not understand what was happening. Police vehicles lined the area. Yellow crime scene tape appeared. Officers moved in and out of the residence. The ordinary calm of the neighborhood disappeared beneath a growing sense of unease. People began talking, speculating, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The rumors started almost immediately. A robbery gone wrong. A targeted attack. A family dispute. An unknown intruder. Nobody knew. And in the absence of information, imagination filled the gaps. Inside the home, Detectives continued searching for answers. One of the earliest priorities in any homicide investigation is reconstructing the timeline. Who was last seen alive? Who had contact with the victims? Who might have entered the residence? Who had a motive? At this stage, investigators possessed far more questions than answers. But certain observations quickly stood out. There was evidence of extreme violence. There were multiple victims. There appeared to be no obvious signs pointing immediately toward a random burglary. The scene felt personal. That impression did not prove anything. But experienced investigators often pay attention to such instincts. Crime scenes sometimes reveal emotional elements that cannot be ignored. The level of violence, the location, the victim selection. All of these details can suggest whether an offender acted randomly or with purpose. As the hours passed, forensic teams worked methodically. Bloodstain analysis, photographic documentation, collection of trace evidence. Nothing was rushed. A homicide investigation must be built carefully because every conclusion may later be challenged in court. Meanwhile, detectives focused on understanding the family itself. Who were the Richardsons? Did they have enemies? Financial problems? Recent conflicts? Threats? Anything capable of explaining such a devastating attack? Friends and acquaintances were contacted. Background information was gathered. Investigators searched for patterns. At first, the Richardson family appeared remarkably ordinary. That fact made the murders even more disturbing. Violence often feels easier to explain when warning signs exist. The absence of obvious warning signs creates deeper mystery. And this case contained plenty of mystery. Perhaps the most significant mystery remained Jasmine. As long as she was missing, every theory remained incomplete. Some investigators feared she might already be dead somewhere else. Others hoped she had survived. The uncertainty weighed heavily over the entire investigation. Then came another troubling realization. The search for Jasmine was becoming increasingly important not only because she might be a victim. She might also be a witness. If she had seen anything, she could potentially identify the killer. She could explain what happened inside the house. She could provide answers unavailable anywhere else. The missing girl had suddenly become the most important person in the entire case. Police intensified their efforts. Every lead was examined. Every reported sighting was considered. Every possibility was pursued. The pressure continued growing. Media attention expanded. The community demanded answers. And all the while, investigators remained unaware that the most shocking revelation of the entire case was still waiting ahead. Because somewhere beyond the boundaries of Medicine Hat, Jasmine Richardson was alive. Not hiding. Not running from an unknown killer. Not desperately seeking help. Alive. And within a matter of days, the investigation would uncover a truth so disturbing that it would transform public understanding of the case forever. The discovery of the bodies had already horrified Canada. What investigators were about to learn next would shock the nation even more. The missing child everyone feared was a victim would soon become the central figure in one of the most unbelievable family murder investigations the country had ever seen. Part 6. The Investigation. In the first hours after the bodies of Mark, Deborah, and Jacob Richardson were discovered, investigators worked under a set of assumptions that seemed entirely reasonable. 3 people had been murdered inside their home. A 12-year-old girl was missing. The most obvious conclusion was that Jasmine Richardson was another victim, one who had either been abducted or had somehow escaped the attack. That assumption shaped the early direction of the investigation. Police distributed information about Jasmine. Officers followed leads. Tips arrived from members of the public. Every reported sighting generated new activity. Every possibility was examined. The urgency was genuine. If Jasmine had been taken against her will, time could be the difference between life and death. But homicide investigations have a way of challenging assumptions. The deeper detectives looked, the more complicated the picture became. The first significant development arrived quickly. Within approximately 24 hours of discovering the bodies, police located Jasmine Richardson. She was found alive alongside Jeremy Steinke in a community hundreds of kilometers away from Medicine Hat. At first glance, the discovery appeared positive. The missing child had been found. The presumed survivor was safe. Investigators now had someone who might explain what happened inside the Richardson home. But almost immediately, experienced detectives began noticing things that felt unusual. People react differently to trauma. There is no universal way to behave after surviving a horrific crime. Investigators understand this. Some victims cry. Some become silent. Some appear detached. Some struggle to remember details. For that reason, detectives avoid drawing conclusions solely from behavior. Yet behavior can still raise questions. And Jasmine's behavior raised questions. According to accounts later discussed during legal proceedings, investigators found her demeanor unexpectedly calm. Not definitive proof of anything. Not evidence by itself. But enough to attract attention. More importantly, detectives began examining her relationship with Jeremy Steinke. That examination revealed a connection already known to some family members, but not yet fully understood by investigators. Jeremy was 23 years old. Jasmine was 12. The age difference alone immediately drew scrutiny. Detectives started asking questions. How long had they known each other? How close were they? What role, if any, had Jeremy played in the events surrounding the murders? At this stage, investigators still lacked critical information. But the focus of the case was beginning to shift. The missing child was no longer merely a potential victim. She had become a central figure in the investigation. As police dug deeper, they entered a world increasingly familiar to modern detectives. Computers, internet communications, electronic messages, digital footprints. Criminal investigations had changed dramatically by the early 2000s. People often reveal parts of themselves through electronic communication that they hide in face-to-face interactions. Thoughts, fantasies, plans, emotions. Digital records preserve them all. Investigators soon began reviewing messages connected to Jasmine and Jeremy. What they found was disturbing. The communications revealed a relationship far deeper than many people had realized. More alarming still, some messages contained language that seemed to move beyond ordinary teenage rebellion. Expressions of devotion, talk of being together forever, discussions portraying family members as obstacles. Investigators encountered messages that suggested something much darker had been developing beneath the surface. At first, detectives had to consider every possibility. People say shocking things online. Teenagers often use dramatic language. Fantasy and reality do not always overlap. A disturbing message does not automatically prove criminal intent. Yet when those messages are examined alongside 3 murders, their significance changes dramatically. Every word begins to matter. Every conversation gains potential importance. Detectives started constructing timelines. When were the messages sent? Who participated? What events occurred afterward? Gradually, patterns emerged. The more investigators learned, the harder it became to view the murders as the work of an unknown intruder. Attention increasingly focused on Jeremy Steinke. Those who knew him described a man fascinated by dark imagery. He cultivated a Gothic persona. He often spoke dramatically, sometimes violently. Many people who adopt unusual identities never commit crimes. Investigators understood that. Style alone proves nothing. But detectives were no longer evaluating appearance. They were evaluating evidence. And evidence was accumulating. Interviews became increasingly important. Investigators spoke with friends, acquaintances, people who had observed the relationship. Every conversation contributed another piece to the puzzle. Some described Jasmine's intense emotional attachment to Jeremy. Others recalled concerns about the relationship itself. Still others remembered conversations that seemed strange in hindsight. The investigation began revealing something investigators encounter in many major cases. Warning signs often appear obvious only after tragedy occurs. Before the murders, isolated concerns may seem disconnected. Afterward, those same concerns form a recognizable pattern. As the evidence mounted, police faced a difficult reality. The case was becoming less about identifying a mysterious killer and more about proving exactly how the murders had been planned and carried out. Physical evidence from the crime scene was analyzed alongside digital evidence. Statements were compared. Timelines were tested. Inconsistencies were examined. Every investigative step pointed toward the same conclusion. This had not been a random attack. This had not been a burglary gone wrong. This had not been an act committed by a stranger targeting an unsuspecting family. Instead, investigators increasingly believed the murders were connected to the people closest to the victims. That realization transformed the case. Family homicides carry a unique emotional weight. The idea that danger could emerge from inside a household often shocks communities more deeply than crimes committed by strangers. People expect threats to come from outside. When those threats originate within relationships built on trust, the sense of betrayal becomes overwhelming. For detectives, however, emotions could not replace evidence. Every conclusion needed support. Every accusation required proof. The investigation therefore continued methodically. Search warrants, computer examinations, phone records, witness interviews. Each step strengthened the case. Meanwhile, public attention intensified. News coverage expanded across Canada. People followed developments closely. The details seemed almost impossible to believe. A murdered family. A missing daughter found alive. An older boyfriend. Rumors of planning. Rumors of conspiracy. The story captured national attention because it challenged deeply held assumptions about childhood, family, and violence. Many Canadians struggled to comprehend how a 12-year-old girl could become connected to a crime of such magnitude. That question hung over every discussion, every news report, every conversation. Investigators themselves had to confront the same issue. Children can commit crimes. History provides numerous examples. Yet society instinctively associates childhood with innocence. Cases like this force uncomfortable questions about influence, vulnerability, manipulation, and personal responsibility. As detectives continued their work, those questions remained unanswered. What mattered most was establishing facts. And the facts were leading investigators toward a devastating conclusion. Evidence increasingly suggested that Jasmine had not been a victim who escaped. She had not been a witness who happened to survive. Instead, investigators believed she had known what was going to happen. More than that, they believed she had helped make it happen. The implications were staggering. If true, the case represented far more than a triple homicide. It represented a conspiracy involving a 12-year-old child and an adult man. A conspiracy directed against her own family. The emotional impact of that possibility reverberated through every aspect of the investigation. Officers who had initially searched desperately for a kidnapped child now found themselves examining evidence against that same child. The shift was extraordinary and deeply unsettling. Yet the investigation was not finished. Detectives still needed to establish precisely what had occurred. How much planning had taken place? Who initiated the idea? Who participated? Who carried out the killings? Those questions would eventually move from police interview rooms to a courtroom. But before that could happen, investigators needed one final breakthrough. A breakthrough that would connect messages, relationships, physical evidence, and witness testimony into a coherent narrative. A breakthrough capable of transforming suspicion into proof. And as the investigation advanced, that breakthrough was drawing closer with every passing day. The truth behind the Richardson family murders was beginning to emerge. And when the full picture finally came into focus, it would become one of the most shocking revelations in Canadian criminal history. Part 7. The Breakthrough. Every major homicide investigation reaches a moment when scattered fragments suddenly begin fitting together. Individual clues stop existing as isolated facts. The timeline sharpens. Motives become clearer. Contradictions start revealing themselves. And investigators finally begin seeing the shape of the truth hidden beneath layers of deception. For the detectives working the Richardson family murders, that moment did not arrive through a dramatic confession or a single piece of physical evidence discovered at the crime scene. Instead, It emerged gradually through thousands of details painstakingly assembled over days and weeks. Electronic messages, witness statements, travel records, interrogations, behavioral observations. Each piece appeared small on its own. Together, they formed a devastating picture. By this point in the investigation, detectives no longer viewed Jasmine Richardson as a traumatized survivor. The evidence had pushed them far beyond that possibility. The central question was no longer whether she had knowledge of the crime. The central question was how deeply involved she had been. Investigators began reconstructing the relationship between Jasmine and Jeremy Steinke with extraordinary detail. They examined communications stretching back months. The more they read, the more disturbing the relationship appeared. Many of the messages reflected the intense emotions common in adolescent infatuation. Declarations of love, promises of loyalty, dreams about a future together. But mixed among those messages were darker themes. Discussions about obstacles, expressions of frustration, references to Jasmine's parents standing in the way of the life she wanted. The messages painted a picture of a girl becoming increasingly consumed by a fantasy in which her relationship mattered more than anything else. More than school, more than friendships, more than family, more than reality itself. Detectives noticed something else. The conversations did not exist in isolation. They mirrored a growing conflict taking place inside the Richardson household. Mark and Deborah had become increasingly concerned about Jeremy. From their perspective, they were protecting their daughter. A 23-year-old man pursuing a relationship with a 12-year-old girl represented an obvious danger. They attempted to impose limits. They tried to prevent contact. They enforced rules. The more they resisted the relationship, however, the more emotionally invested Jasmine appeared to become. What might have been a temporary teenage obsession was transforming into something stronger, something more dangerous. For investigators, understanding motive required understanding that emotional environment. Murders rarely occur in a vacuum. They emerge from relationships, conflicts, fears, desires, and choices. The challenge was determining exactly how those factors had evolved into violence. As evidence continued accumulating, detectives turned their attention toward the planning stage. Because one fact had become increasingly difficult to ignore. The murders showed signs of preparation. This did not look like a spontaneous argument that spiraled out of control. The attack occurred at night. The victims were targeted inside their own home. The offender arrived armed. Those details suggested forethought. And where there is planning, there are often traces. People talk. People write. People search. People leave evidence behind. Investigators searched relentlessly for those traces. Eventually, they found them. Among the most significant discoveries were communications indicating discussions about eliminating Jasmine's parents. When viewed in isolation, such statements might have been dismissed as fantasy. Teenagers sometimes say shocking things without any intention of acting on them. People exaggerate. They vent frustration. They engage in dramatic role-playing. The difficulty for investigators was determining where fantasy ended and reality began. The murders themselves answered that question. 3 people were dead. The discussions could no longer be viewed merely as imagination. Now they appeared to be part of a larger narrative leading directly toward the crime. As detectives organized the evidence, another important realization emerged. Jeremy Steinke's role appeared central. He was not merely a bystander. He was not someone who happened to be present. The evidence suggested active involvement. Witness accounts and forensic findings increasingly pointed toward him as the person who carried out the killings. Yet investigators also believed the crime would not have occurred without Jasmine's participation. The relationship between the two became the key to understanding everything. One supplied the violence. The other supplied access, motivation, and support. At least, that was the theory investigators were developing. The challenge now was proving it beyond doubt. Interviews became more focused. Questions became more precise. Detectives began confronting inconsistencies. People involved in criminal conspiracies often make mistakes. No matter how carefully a plan is constructed, reality rarely unfolds exactly as expected. Memories conflict. Timelines overlap incorrectly. Statements change. Small lies accumulate until they create larger contradictions. Investigators excel at identifying those contradictions. And in this case, they found many. The story became increasingly difficult for the suspects to maintain. Facts refused to cooperate with deception. Digital records preserved conversations. Witnesses remembered details. Physical evidence supported investigative conclusions. Every new discovery narrowed the available explanations. Gradually, the walls began closing in. The breakthrough intensified when investigators established a clearer sequence of events leading up to the murders. The planning no longer appeared theoretical. It appeared deliberate, specific, purposeful. This realization transformed the entire case. Instead of a mysterious family homicide, detectives were now examining what they believed to be a conspiracy. A conspiracy involving a 12-year-old girl and a 23-year-old man. The shocking nature of that conclusion cannot be overstated. Even experienced investigators struggled with the implications. Children are often victims in criminal cases. Far less frequently do they become participants in crimes of this magnitude. The age of the accused created an emotional and psychological complexity unlike anything seen in most homicide investigations. Could a 12-year-old truly understand the consequences of such actions? How much influence had Jeremy exercised? How much responsibility belonged to Jasmine? These questions would eventually dominate public debate. But investigators could not focus on philosophical questions. Their task was to establish facts. And the facts increasingly pointed toward joint responsibility. The deeper detectives explored the relationship, the more apparent the power imbalance became. Jeremy was an adult. Jasmine was a child. He possessed years of additional life experience. He occupied a position of influence. That reality would later become a major issue during legal proceedings. Yet investigators also discovered evidence suggesting Jasmine had actively embraced the plan. The case refused to fit simple narratives. It was neither a story of pure manipulation nor a story of complete independence. Instead, it occupied a deeply uncomfortable space between those extremes. As detectives assembled their final case, the picture became painfully clear. Mark Richardson had attempted to protect his daughter. Deborah Richardson had attempted to guide her. Both had viewed Jeremy as a threat. Neither could have imagined how catastrophic the consequences would become. The irony was heartbreaking. The very actions they took to safeguard their child appeared to have intensified the conflict that ultimately led to their deaths. Of course, responsibility rested with those who chose violence. Parents establish rules every day without becoming victims of murder. The tragedy emerged not from parental concern but from the decisions made by the people who responded to that concern with obsession and hatred. By the time investigators completed the crucial phase of their work, they believed they understood what had happened. The murders were not random. They were not accidental. They were not the product of a stranger entering the wrong house. They were the result of planning, the result of choices. The result of a relationship that had drifted far beyond the boundaries of fantasy and entered the realm of deadly reality. For detectives, the breakthrough represented both success and heartbreak. Success because the truth was emerging. Heartbreak because the truth itself was so devastating. 3 members of a family had lost their lives. An entire household had been destroyed. And at the center of the tragedy stood a 12-year-old girl whose future had now become inseparably linked to one of the most shocking crimes in Canadian history. The investigation had finally revealed what happened. The next challenge would be proving it in court. And when that courtroom battle began, every disturbing detail uncovered by investigators would be placed under a microscope, scrutinized by lawyers, judges, jurors, the media, and a nation desperate to understand how such an unimaginable crime had become possible. Part 8. The Justice. By the time the Richardson family murder case reached the courtroom, the crime had already become one of the most discussed criminal investigations in Canada. For nearly everyone who followed the story, the facts seemed impossible to reconcile. A mother dead, a father dead, an 8-year-old boy dead, and at the center of it all, a 12-year-old girl. The public wanted answers, not simply about what had happened. Investigators had largely answered that question. People wanted to understand why. How could a child become involved in the destruction of her own family? How could a relationship evolve into something so catastrophic? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of justice could possibly exist for a crime unlike almost any other in Canadian history? As legal proceedings approached, media attention intensified. News organizations across the country followed every development. Television crews gathered outside courthouses. Journalists analyzed evidence and interviewed experts. Psychologists discussed adolescent development. Criminologists debated manipulation and responsibility. Parents across Canada watched closely, trying to imagine themselves in the place of Mark and Deborah Richardson. The case had evolved beyond a criminal prosecution. It had become a national conversation. One of the first legal challenges involved Jasmine's age. She was only 12 years old at the time of the murders. In Canada, young offenders are treated differently from adults. The justice system recognizes that children possess different levels of maturity, judgment, and psychological development. As a result, significant legal protections existed regarding Jasmine's identity and court proceedings. Those protections reflected an uncomfortable reality. The accused was simultaneously connected to one of the country's most shocking crimes and still legally considered a child. That contradiction sat at the heart of the entire case. When court proceedings began, prosecutors faced the enormous task of presenting a narrative that explained how the murders occurred and who bore responsibility. They did not rely on a single piece of evidence. Instead, they presented a mosaic. Hundreds of individual details assembled into a coherent picture. Witness testimony, digital communications, investigative findings, forensic evidence, behavioral evidence. Each piece supported the next. Together, they formed the foundation of the prosecution's argument. The courtroom became the place where months of investigative work were finally examined in public. Jurors listened carefully. Every statement mattered. Every timeline mattered. Every communication mattered. Because the stakes could not have been higher. The prosecution argued that the murders were not random. They were not accidental. They were not spontaneous acts committed in a moment of uncontrollable emotion. According to prosecutors, the evidence demonstrated planning, intent, preparation. The relationship between Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke became a central focus. Messages exchanged between them revealed intense emotional attachment. Prosecutors argued that those communications also revealed growing hostility toward Jasmine's parents. The courtroom heard evidence suggesting that Mark and Deborah had become obstacles in the minds of those planning the crime. The picture painted by prosecutors was chilling. A forbidden relationship, increasing resentment, discussions about removing barriers, and ultimately, a plan that culminated in murder. The defense faced a difficult challenge. No one disputed the horrifying outcome. 3 people were dead. The issue was responsibility. The issue was intent. The issue was understanding how much influence Jeremy had exercised over a 12-year-old girl. Throughout the proceedings, questions of manipulation lingered over the courtroom. Jeremy Steinke was 23 years old. Jasmine was 12. The age gap represented far more than numbers. It represented a profound difference in emotional development and life experience. Some observers viewed Jasmine primarily as a victim of manipulation. Others viewed her as an active participant who knowingly helped facilitate the murders. The legal system had to navigate that complexity carefully. Meanwhile, separate proceedings focused on Jeremy Steinke. The evidence against him was substantial. Investigators had reconstructed the events leading to the murders with increasing precision. Witnesses described aspects of his behavior and relationship with Jasmine. Physical evidence connected him to the crime. Digital communications revealed the evolution of the conspiracy. The prosecution's narrative portrayed him as the direct perpetrator of the killings. As testimony continued, the emotional weight of the case became increasingly apparent. The victims were never far from the center of the proceedings. Photographs, descriptions, memories. The courtroom repeatedly returned to the lives that had been lost. Mark Richardson, a father trying to protect his daughter. Deborah Richardson, a mother attempting to guide her family. Jacob Richardson, an 8-year-old boy who never had the opportunity to grow up. For many observers, Jacob's death remained especially painful. Children represent possibility, potential, future. The loss of an adult is tragic. The loss of a child often feels uniquely devastating because it carries the weight of everything that might have been. Jurors listened to evidence for weeks. They examined timelines. They evaluated credibility. They reviewed communications. The process was meticulous. Major criminal trials move carefully because every conclusion must withstand scrutiny. Eventually, the time came for decisions. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense. Months of investigation and legal preparation had led to this moment. Families of the victims waited. Lawyers waited. Journalists waited. And across Canada, many people followed the outcome closely. The verdicts reflected the prosecution's core argument. The court concluded that Jasmine Richardson was guilty of first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of her parents and younger brother. The decision shocked many Canadians, even those who had followed the case from the beginning. The image remained difficult to process. A 12-year-old girl convicted in a multiple homicide case. Such cases are extraordinarily rare. The verdict ensured that the Richardson murders would remain one of the most infamous criminal cases in Canadian history. Sentencing presented another challenge. How should society punish a child involved in a crime of such magnitude? The answer could never satisfy everyone. Some members of the public believed the punishment would inevitably be too lenient. Others emphasized rehabilitation and the realities of adolescent development. The legal system ultimately imposed the maximum sentence available under Canadian youth justice laws at the time: 10 years. A combination of custody, supervision, treatment, and ongoing monitoring. The sentence reflected the extraordinary nature of the crime while also acknowledging Jasmine's age. Jeremy Steinke faced a very different outcome. As an adult convicted in connection with the murders, he received a life sentence. The court concluded that his responsibility for the killings warranted the most severe punishment available. For many Canadians, that sentence represented a measure of justice. Yet justice and closure are not the same thing. No verdict could restore the Richardson family. No sentence could bring Mark, Deborah, or Jacob back. No courtroom decision could erase the events of April 23, 2006. When the proceedings finally ended, the legal questions had largely been answered. The guilty had been identified. The sentences had been imposed. The investigation had achieved its objective. But outside the courtroom, deeper questions remained. Questions that could not be resolved through legal rulings alone. Questions about influence, about adolescence, about obsession, about vulnerability. Questions about how ordinary families can find themselves caught in extraordinary tragedies. The Richardson case had delivered justice in the legal sense. Yet for many people, understanding remained elusive. Because the facts were clear. The verdicts were clear. The sentences were clear. What remained difficult to comprehend was the path that led there. How a family that once shared meals, conversations, birthdays, and ordinary moments could end in violence, so profound that an entire nation would remember it for decades. As the courthouse emptied and media attention gradually shifted elsewhere, one chapter of the story came to a close. The investigation was over. The trials were over. The verdicts were final. But the emotional impact of the case was only beginning. The murders had left scars not only on surviving relatives and investigators, but also on a country forced to confront one of the most disturbing family tragedies in its history. And those scars would continue shaping conversations long after the courtroom lights were turned off. Part 9. The Aftermath. When the courtroom proceedings finally ended, a strange silence settled over the Richardson case. For years, investigators had searched for answers. Lawyers had argued over evidence. Journalists had followed every development. Experts had analyzed motives. The public had watched in disbelief. Then suddenly there were verdicts, sentences, conclusions. The machinery of the justice system had completed its work. But for those left behind, life does not move forward simply because a judge closes a file. Real tragedy lingers long after legal proceedings end. It remains in empty chairs, unanswered questions, family photographs, memories that arrive unexpectedly in quiet moments. And nowhere was that reality more visible than in the aftermath of the Richardson family murders. The house that had once contained a family now stood as a symbol of loss. For neighbors, it became impossible to separate the property from the events that had occurred there. People who had once waved to the Richardsons while mowing their lawns now carried memories attached to police vehicles, crime scene tape, and television cameras. Communities never forget crimes like this. The physical signs eventually disappear. The emotional ones rarely do. Medicine had itself changed in subtle ways. Residents continued living their lives. Children continued attending school. Businesses remained open. The city moved forward because cities always do. Yet beneath that normality existed a shared memory. A collective awareness that something unimaginable had happened within their community. Many residents later described the murders as a loss of innocence. Not because violence had never existed before. Every community experiences crime. Rather, because this particular crime challenged assumptions people held about family, childhood, and safety. The threat had not come from a stranger lurking in the shadows. It had emerged from relationships that should have been built on trust. That realization stayed with people. Across Canada, the case continued generating discussion long after the trials concluded. Psychologists examined it. Criminologists studied it. Journalists revisited it. Documentaries explored it. Each generation encountering the story seemed to ask the same questions. How did this happen? Could it have been prevented? What warning signs were missed? Those questions remain difficult because human behavior rarely offers simple explanations. People often want a single cause. One event. One mistake. One person to blame. The Richardson case resists such simplicity. The tragedy emerged from many factors intersecting at once. Adolescence. Obsession. Manipulation. Isolation. Fantasy. Conflict. Poor decisions. Violence. Each element contributed to the disaster. Removing any one of them might have altered the outcome. Yet history offers no opportunity for revision. What happened cannot be undone. The victims remain the most important part of that reality. Mark Richardson is often remembered as a father trying to protect his daughter. The details of the case sometimes overshadow that simple truth. Parents establish rules because they worry. They intervene because they care. They say no because they fear consequences their children cannot yet see. Mark's actions reflected concerns that many parents would consider entirely reasonable. Deborah Richardson is remembered as a mother whose efforts to guide her family ended in unimaginable tragedy. The ordinary acts of motherhood rarely attract public attention. Helping with homework, preparing meals, offering advice, providing comfort. Yet those small acts are the foundation of countless families. When Deborah's life ended, all those future moments disappeared with her. Then there is Jacob, the youngest victim. The child whose story remains especially heartbreaking. As years passed, Jacob became a symbol of everything lost in the tragedy. He never reached adolescence, never graduated, never built a career, never created a family of his own. Every possibility ended at the age of 8. In many ways, Jacob represents the most painful lesson of the case. Violence rarely confines itself to its intended targets. Its consequences spread outward, affecting people who never chose to participate in the conflict. Jacob had no role in the relationship between Jasmine and Jeremy. No role in the arguments. No role in the planning. Yet he paid the ultimate price. The legal system eventually released Jasmine's identity restrictions after she reached adulthood, and over the years public curiosity about her future remained intense. Many people struggled with conflicting emotions. Some viewed her primarily as a perpetrator. Others emphasized her age at the time of the crimes. Still others focused on the influence Jeremy Steinke may have exerted over her. The debate reflects a larger challenge society faces when children commit serious crimes. People want accountability. People want justice. But they also recognize that children are fundamentally different from adults. Those competing realities often create uncomfortable questions without comfortable answers. Jeremy Steinke's future generated far less debate. As an adult offender sentenced to life imprisonment, public opinion generally viewed his role through a more straightforward lens. Yet, even there, questions remained. How does a 23-year-old become involved in a relationship with a 12-year-old child? How does fantasy evolve into murder? How does someone cross so many moral boundaries? The answers are disturbing precisely because they reveal how gradual such transformations can be. Catastrophic crimes rarely begin as catastrophic crimes. They begin with conversations, ideas, choices, boundaries crossed one step at a time. Looking back, many observers search for the exact moment when intervention might have changed everything. Perhaps a different decision. Perhaps stronger supervision. Perhaps earlier recognition of danger. Perhaps different circumstances. The truth is that hindsight creates an illusion of clarity. Once we know the ending, warning signs seem obvious. Before tragedy occurs, those same warning signs often appear scattered and disconnected. That reality makes prevention extraordinarily difficult. Still, the case influenced important conversations throughout Canada. Parents became more aware of online relationships. Schools expanded discussions about personal safety and manipulation. Communities paid greater attention to the ways vulnerable young people can become isolated from healthy support systems. While no reform can erase what happened, lessons can emerge from tragedy. And perhaps that is one of the few meaningful ways society can honor victims after devastating crimes. Years later, the Richardson family murders continue to occupy a unique place in Canadian criminal history. Not because they were the bloodiest murders, not because they involved the largest number of victims, but because they shattered expectations. The case forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about adolescence, influence, and the complexity of human behavior. It reminded the public that evil does not always appear in forms we expect. Sometimes it emerges gradually, quietly, hidden behind ordinary appearances, hidden behind familiar faces. Yet if there is one lesson that rises above all others, it may be the importance of remembering the victims rather than the perpetrators. True crime stories often risk becoming focused on offenders, their motives, their psychology, their actions. But at the center of every case are human beings whose lives mattered long before the crime occurred. Mark mattered. Deborah mattered. Jacob mattered. They were not merely names in a case file. They were a family, a father who worked to build a future, a mother who cared for her children, a little boy whose life had barely begun. Their story deserves to be remembered for more than the way it ended. As the years continue passing, the headlines fade. Court transcripts gather dust. News reports become archives. But grief operates on a different timeline. The people lost in April 2006 remain lost. The empty spaces they left behind remain empty. And somewhere within that reality lies the deepest tragedy of all. Not the investigation, not the trial, not the media attention, but the simple fact that an ordinary family once sat together inside a home in Medicine Hat, believing they had countless tomorrows ahead of them. They never knew that one spring night would become their last. And that is why the Richardson family murders continue to resonate decades later. Because beneath every shocking detail and every courtroom revelation exists a timeless reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly love can become entangled with obsession, and how the consequences of a single terrible decision can echo across generations. The case is over. The verdicts are final. History has recorded what happened. But the memory of Mark, Deborah, and Jacob Richardson remains the part of this story that matters most. And it always will. Part 10. Echoes that never fade. Long after the police files were archived and the courtroom seats emptied, the Richardson case continued to exist in places no legal document could ever reach. It existed in memory, It existed in conversations whispered across dinner tables. It existed in classrooms where teachers discussed internet safety. It existed in the minds of parents who suddenly looked at their children differently. And it existed in the quiet moments when people found themselves wondering how a family that once appeared so ordinary could be destroyed from within. Years passed. The headlines disappeared. New crimes captured public attention. New tragedies filled television screens. Yet every so often, the Richardson murders resurfaced. A documentary. A newspaper retrospective. A discussion among criminologists. A social media debate. The story refused to completely fade away. Part of that persistence came from the questions the case left behind. Many crimes offer a clear villain and a clear victim. This case challenged that simplicity. Jeremy Steinke was an adult who entered into a relationship with a child. His responsibility was undeniable. Yet the involvement of Jasmine created layers of complexity that continued to trouble observers. Some people viewed her as a manipulated child. Others saw her as an active participant. Most found themselves somewhere between those two positions. The difficulty was that both realities could exist at the same time. A person can be vulnerable and responsible, influenced and accountable, young and dangerous. Human beings often search for easy categories. This case resisted them. As researchers examined the events over the years, many focused on adolescent psychology. The human brain does not mature all at once. The parts responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and risk assessment continue developing well into early adulthood. Teenagers often experience emotions with extraordinary intensity. Love feels absolute. Rejection feels catastrophic. Conflict feels permanent. For most young people, those emotions gradually pass. They mature. They gain perspective. They recognize that problems which once seemed overwhelming were temporary. The tragedy of the Richardson case is that the people involved never allowed time to do its work. Instead of waiting for emotions to cool, they acted. Instead of accepting boundaries, they sought to eliminate them. Instead of imagining a future beyond conflict, they attempted to force a solution through violence. That decision changed everything. Experts would later point to another lesson embedded within the case. Dangerous relationships rarely become dangerous overnight. They evolve gradually. One conversation becomes two. One boundary violation becomes another. One secret leads to 10 more. People adapt to unhealthy situations step by step. Each new development feels only slightly different from the one before it, until eventually they find themselves standing somewhere they never imagined reaching. When investigators reconstructed the relationship between Jasmine and Jeremy, they discovered precisely that kind of progression. The transformation was not sudden. It was gradual. A slow movement away from reality and toward fantasy. A fantasy where consequences no longer seemed real. A fantasy where obstacles could simply be removed. A fantasy that eventually collided with reality in the most horrific way possible. The impact of the case extended beyond criminal justice. Schools across Canada increasingly emphasized discussions about online relationships and personal safety. Parents became more attentive to digital communication. Communities developed a greater awareness of how vulnerable young people could become when isolated from healthy support systems. The internet itself was still evolving rapidly during the mid-2000s. Many adults did not fully understand the online environments their children inhabited. The Richardson case became one of several tragedies that forced society to confront that reality. Technology creates opportunities for connection. It also creates opportunities for manipulation. The challenge lies in recognizing the difference. For the surviving relatives connected to the Richardson family, public discussion often came with a cost. Every new article reopened old wounds. Every documentary revived painful memories. Every anniversary brought renewed attention. While the public consumed the story as a criminal case, those closest to the victims experienced it as something entirely different. For them, it was not a mystery. It was not a lesson. It was not entertainment. It was the loss of people they loved. That distinction is important. True crime often focuses heavily on perpetrators, their motivations, their psychology, their actions. Yet the lasting impact of violence is carried primarily by those left behind. The empty spaces remain. The birthdays that are never celebrated. The holidays marked by absence. The photographs that suddenly become priceless because they can never be replaced. Those realities continue long after public attention moves elsewhere. If Mark Richardson had survived into old age, he might have become a grandfather. If Deborah Richardson had lived, she might have watched her children build families of their own. If Jacob Richardson had reached adulthood, he might have discovered passions and dreams nobody ever had the chance to see. Those futures vanished on a single night. And perhaps that is the deepest loss hidden within every homicide. Not only the life that ended, but all the lives that could have followed. The years, the memories, the possibilities. The Richardson case also forced many people to reconsider how they define evil. Popular culture often portrays evil as something obvious. A monster, a stranger, a figure easily identified and feared. Reality is often more complicated. Some of history's most disturbing crimes emerge from ordinary environments, ordinary homes, ordinary communities, ordinary people making increasingly destructive choices. That truth is unsettling because it offers no comforting distance. Sometimes it develops quietly within relationships, resentments, and obsessions that remain invisible until it is too late. Today, nearly 2 decades after the murders, the story continues to provoke strong emotions. Shock, sadness, anger, confusion. For many people, those feelings never fully disappear. The case remains difficult to comprehend because it challenges deeply held beliefs about childhood, family, and love. Most people associate love with protection, with sacrifice, with care. The Richardson murders reveal what can happen when obsession disguises itself as love and when fantasy replaces empathy. The consequences can be catastrophic. As time moves forward, the details of the investigation may gradually fade from public memory. The exact dates, the courtroom arguments, the forensic evidence, those things belong to history. But the central lesson remains timeless. Every relationship requires boundaries. Every conflict requires perspective. Every moment of emotional intensity eventually passes if given enough time. The tragedy in medicine had unfolded because the people involved stopped believing that. They convinced themselves that violence could solve what patience could not. They were wrong. And 3 innocent people paid the price. In the end, perhaps the most meaningful way to remember the Richardson case is not through the killers, the trial, or the headlines. It is through the victims. Mark Richardson, Deborah Richardson, Jacob Richardson. A family that once laughed together, argued together, celebrated birthdays together, and planned for a future they expected to share. Their lives were larger than the crime that ended them. Their memories deserve to be larger as well. And that is where this story ultimately belongs. Not in the darkness of the murders themselves, but in the remembrance of the lives that were lost and the enduring hope that future tragedies might be prevented by the lessons left behind. Part 11. Inside the Mind of Obsession. One of the reasons the Richardson family murders continue to fascinate criminologists, psychologists, and investigators years after the case ended is that the crime forces people to confront an uncomfortable question. What happens when fantasy becomes more important than reality? Most people experience fantasies. They imagine perfect relationships, perfect futures, perfect versions of themselves. Teenagers especially live in worlds shaped by intense emotions and vivid imagination. Usually, those fantasies remain harmless. They serve as temporary escapes from everyday frustrations. Over time, reality reasserts itself. People mature. They adapt. They learn that life rarely follows the script they imagined. But sometimes fantasy becomes something else. Sometimes it grows stronger than reality. And when that happens, dangerous things can occur. By all accounts, Jasmine Richardson was not born violent. Nothing in her early childhood suggested she would one day become connected to one of Canada's most shocking murder cases. She grew up in a normal home. She attended school. She had friends. She experienced the same insecurities, hopes, and frustrations that millions of young people experience every day. That reality is important because it challenges a common misconception about violent crime. Many people imagine that offenders are fundamentally different from everyone else. That warning signs must always be obvious. That darkness can always be recognized in advance. Reality rarely works that way. The most disturbing cases often involve individuals who once appeared entirely ordinary. As investigators examined Jasmine's life, they found a young girl standing at a vulnerable point between childhood and adolescence. 12 years old is a confusing age. Children begin craving independence while still lacking the emotional tools necessary to navigate complex situations. They want freedom. They want identity. They want love. Most importantly, they desperately want to be understood. At that age, relationships can take on enormous significance.
A friendship feel permanent.
A rejection feels devastating.
A romance feels eternal.
Emotions arrive with extraordinary force because experience has not yet taught moderation. For Jasmine, Jeremy Steinke entered her life during precisely this vulnerable period. To outside observers, the relationship seemed alarming from the beginning. The age difference alone raised obvious concerns. A 23-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl existed in completely different stages of life. Yet unhealthy relationships often thrive precisely because the participants view them differently than everyone else. Where outsiders see danger, those involved may see understanding. Where outsiders see manipulation, they may see affection. Where outsiders see warning signs, they may see proof of devotion. This distortion becomes even more powerful when the relationship faces opposition. Psychologists have long observed a phenomenon in which resistance strengthens attachment. When people are told they cannot have something, that thing often becomes more desirable. Forbidden relationships frequently become emotionally intensified because the conflict itself creates a sense of shared identity. The couple begins viewing themselves as misunderstood heroes fighting against an unfair world. Every attempt to separate them reinforces the narrative. Every criticism becomes evidence. Every restriction becomes another reason to cling more tightly together. The Richardson case appears to contain elements of exactly that dynamic. As Mark and Deborah Richardson attempted to limit contact between Jasmine and Jeremy, the relationship did not disappear. Instead, it became more emotionally charged. The conflict itself fueled the obsession. Over time, ordinary parental boundaries began transforming into perceived enemies. The very people trying to protect Jasmine became obstacles in the fantasy she was constructing. That transformation is critical to understanding the psychology behind the crime. Violence rarely emerges suddenly. Before people commit harmful acts, they often undergo a process of moral disengagement. They begin redefining others, reframing situations, changing narratives. The victims stop being human beings with feelings and histories. Instead, they become symbols, barriers, problems, obstacles standing between the offender and a desired outcome. This psychological shift allows actions that would once have seemed unimaginable. In the Richardson case, investigators uncovered communications suggesting exactly this kind of thinking. The messages revealed increasing hostility toward parental authority, increasing frustration, increasing willingness to imagine extreme solutions. Perhaps the most chilling aspect is that these changes occurred gradually. No single moment transformed fantasy into murder. The process unfolded over weeks and months. Each step likely seemed smaller than the one that followed. Each boundary crossed made the next boundary easier to cross. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout criminal history. People rarely leap directly into catastrophic decisions. Instead, they drift toward them, one rationalization at a time, one compromise at a time, one excuse at a time, until eventually they arrive somewhere they never intended to go. Jeremy Steinke's role in this progression remains equally important. While much public discussion focused on Jasmine's age, investigators also examined the influence exerted by an adult involved in the relationship. Adults possess power, experience, authority. They shape the perceptions of younger individuals. When that influence becomes manipulative, the consequences can be profound. In many respects, the relationship represented a collision between adolescent vulnerability and adult dysfunction. Neither factor alone explains the murders. Together, they created a dangerous environment. Another psychological aspect frequently discussed by experts involves identity. Adolescence is a period of self-discovery. Young people experiment with different versions of themselves, different styles, different social groups, different beliefs. Most experimentation remains harmless. Yet some individuals become drawn toward identities built around rebellion, alienation, or extreme thinking. Jeremy cultivated an image associated with darkness and violence. For some adolescents seeking belonging, such identities can appear exciting. They offer a sense of uniqueness, a sense of power, a sense of being different from everyone else. The danger arises when symbolic rebellion begins influencing real-world behavior. Fantasy may start as performance. Eventually, it can become action. What makes the Richardson case particularly tragic is that none of the psychological factors involved were necessarily irreversible. The conflict could have ended differently. The relationship could have dissolved. Time could have altered perspectives. Maturity could have changed priorities. Millions of young people survive intense adolescent relationships and later view them as brief chapters in their lives. The difference here is that violence interrupted the natural process of growth. Decisions were made that eliminated the possibility of learning from mistakes. 3 lives ended before anyone had the chance to step back and recognize the reality of what was unfolding. Years later, psychologists continue studying cases like this because they challenge simple explanations. No single factor caused the murders. Not age. Not love. Not manipulation. Not rebellion. The crime emerged from a complex interaction of all those elements. Human behavior is rarely simple. That complexity can be frustrating because people naturally want clear answers. They want certainty. They want a reason. But the truth is often messy. The Richardson murders remind us that tragedy can develop when emotional vulnerability intersects with obsession, when fantasy replaces empathy, and when individuals stop seeing other people as human beings deserving of care and compassion. At its core, the case is not merely a story about murder. It is a story about distorted thinking, about emotional dependency, about the dangers of allowing imagination to override reality. Most importantly, it is a reminder that violence begins long before the first physical act occurs. It begins in ideas, in beliefs, in narratives people tell themselves about the world and their place within it. And once those narratives become detached from reality, the consequences can be devastating. For investigators, understanding these psychological dimensions helped explain how the crime occurred. For society, however, the lessons extend far beyond a single case. Because while the Richardson murders are rare, the forces that contributed to them, loneliness, obsession, manipulation, emotional vulnerability, and the desire to belong, exist everywhere. The challenge is recognizing those forces before they evolve into something far darker. And in Medicine Hat, by the time anyone fully understood what was happening, it was already too late. Part 12. The Community That Never Forgot. There are crimes that dominate headlines for a few days and then slowly disappear from public consciousness. And then there are crimes that become part of a community's identity. The Richardson family murders belonged to the second category. Years after the investigation ended, long after the courtroom lights had been switched off and the media trucks had left Medicine Hat, the shadow of the case remained. Not as a constant presence, not as an open wound bleeding every day, but as a scar that never completely vanished. For the people who lived in Medicine Hat in 2006, memories of that spring are often divided into 2 periods. Before the murders and after the murders. Before the murders, the city felt like countless other Canadian communities. Safe, predictable, familiar. A place where parents expected their children to grow up surrounded by neighbors they knew and trusted. A place where terrible things happen somewhere else. In bigger cities. In distant places. To other people. Then the Richardson murders happened. And suddenly those assumptions no longer felt secure. One of the most profound effects of violent crime is the way it changes perception. The streets remain the same. The houses remain the same. The parks remain the same. Yet people see them differently. The world that once felt predictable becomes slightly less certain, slightly less safe. Residents who remembered the case often described a lingering sense of disbelief, not because they doubted the facts. The facts were clear, but because the crime contradicted everything they thought they understood about their community. The Richardson family was not viewed as dangerous. The neighborhood was not viewed as dangerous. Nothing about the setting seemed to fit the horror that unfolded there. That disconnect haunted people. When crimes align with expectations, they are easier to process. When they violate expectations completely, they leave lasting psychological effects. Parents throughout the city found themselves having new conversations with their children. Some became more protective. Others became more attentive to friendships and online interactions. Many simply found themselves paying closer attention to changes in behavior that previously might have seemed unimportant. The case arrived during a period when society was still learning how deeply the internet could influence personal relationships. Online communication had already become a major part of everyday life, but many adults struggled to understand the digital worlds their children inhabited. The Richardson murders highlighted that gap. Parents realized that significant relationships could develop beyond their direct observation. Conversations could happen privately. Influences could emerge from unexpected places. Communities across Canada began discussing these realities with greater urgency. Schools also felt the impact. Teachers and administrators faced questions that had no easy answers. How can adults recognize when a young person is becoming emotionally isolated? How can unhealthy influences be identified before serious harm occurs? What warning signs should educators watch for?
No universal solution emerged.
But awareness increased dramatically. The case became part of broader discussions about youth mental health, internet safety, and emotional vulnerability. Many people focused on Jasmine. That was inevitable. The idea of a 12-year-old involved in a triple homicide shocked the public imagination. Yet for those closest to the tragedy, the focus often remained elsewhere. They remembered Mark,
Deborah,
Jacob. Friends recalled conversations, shared experiences, ordinary moments that suddenly became precious because they could never happen again. One of the cruelest aspects of violent crime is how it freezes victims in time. The public remembers them as they existed on the day they died. But the people who loved them remember much more. They remember birthdays, vacations,
jokes,
arguments, dreams, private moments invisible to everyone else. The Richardson family became known nationally because of the murders. To those who knew them, however, they remained human beings whose lives were far larger than the tragedy that ended them. As years passed, another phenomenon emerged. New generations encountered the case for the first time. Teenagers who had not yet been born when the murders occurred discovered documentaries and articles about the investigation. University students studied the case in psychology and criminology courses. Researchers referenced it when discussing adolescent development and violent crime. The story continued finding new audiences, and each generation responded with similar questions. How could this happen? Why did nobody stop it? Could it happen again? The persistence of those questions reveals something important. The Richardson case was never just about one family. It became a mirror reflecting broader fears and uncertainties within society. Fear of losing control. Fear of harmful influences. Fear of not recognizing danger until it is too late. These fears resonate because they are universal. Every parent worries about protecting their child. Every community worries about safety. Every society struggles to understand violence when it emerges from unexpected places. The case also sparked discussions about rehabilitation. What should happen when a child commits an extraordinarily serious crime? Can someone who participates in violence at 12 years old truly change? Can society balance accountability with the possibility of growth? These debates continue today. Some people believe certain actions should define a person forever. Others believe children possess a unique capacity for transformation. The Richardson case became one of the most prominent examples used in those discussions. Regardless of where individuals stood on those questions, nearly everyone agreed on one point: the tragedy should never be forgotten. Not because